As they made their way closer, they could hear angry shouts coming from the mass of people. Unable to make out exactly what was being said, they proceeded cautiously. I saw her do it. An angry woman's shouts shattered the darkness. James came to the sinking realization that the home the crowd was forming around was his own. Immediately, a cold shiver reverberated through his body, and his stomach became nauseous. The boys walked closer. "Bring her out here," a deep man's voice broke through the loud murmuring and shouting of the crowd. A moment later, the front door swung open, and a woman that was being held and pushed by a large man emerged. "You've made a mistake! Let me go!" she yelled furiously, struggling to break free. "Mum!" shouted James, dropping the fish he had been carrying and running towards the commotion, with Marcus on his heels. "Let me go! She's lying!" shouted their mother. Still struggling against what the boys could now see was a large town guard. "I saw her with my own eyes," shouted a woman's voice as she emerged from the crowd and approached their mother. "Conversing and worshipping the devil," she yelled, which made people in the crowd shriek and gasp in fear. Late in the evenings, she would emerge from her home and head off into the night. I followed her, I did, out of curiosity, and I saw her speaking with it. A dark, shrouded beast, a hunched and grotesque creature. Of course, I had no idea who it was at first, but then the moon emerged from behind the clouds, and you know what I saw? She held off, keeping the members of the crowd in suspense. A long red bifurcated tail peeking beneath its cloak, she shouted dramatically. Screams now came from the members of the crowd, and one woman fainted and fell to the floor in front of them. "That's completely preposterous!" Their mother shouted back at the crowd, but the full attention was now being held by the woman. James, now close enough to make her face out clearly in the light of a nearby torch. The woman from the previous night was standing before the crowd, rallying them into an angry mob. Slowly, more and more people gathered to investigate the drama unfolding for themselves. "I knew there was something strange about that woman," said another female voice. "I always suspected her father's wares were too good to be." A man paused, clearly looking for a word that could describe the horrible items. "Unnatural," he finished irately. "No, don't listen to her, please. She is only angry because her husband lusts for me," yelled their mother back at the angry mob. "She's a witch," yelled the woman. The crowd gasped again, then fell silent to hear her words. "A witch who cast a horrible enchantment upon my poor, foolish husband." She then turned to the man standing closest to her, who had the same look James and Marcus now had upon their face. "Tell them, dear," she said, clenching her lips and giving him a quick, firm strike to the back of his head. "It's true," he shouted, as though the strike brought him back to his senses. The crowd was now so worked up that they didn't notice her persuasive manner. "A witch! A witch!" began chanting the mob in chorus. However, the man standing next to the woman did not shout with the others. Instead, his face went pale and he faded slowly into the background. At this moment, James broke through the crowd to his mother's side. Tears streaked down his face. Mum, what's going on?" he asked in a small, shaky voice that could barely be heard over the shouts of the mob. His mother, who already had a look of fear and panic upon her face, spotted him. At the sight of her young son, her expression became even more terrified, and with tears in her beautiful, glistening blue eyes, looked right into his own and yelled, "Run!" The woman who was rallying the mob spotted James as well. "There's her demon spawn," she shouted, pointing at James. "There he is! He must be the son of the devil himself," she added. Everyone in the crowd instantly turned to face James. "Seize him!" shouted a guard to another standing near James. "Seize him!" "No!" shouted his mother in sheer terror. "Run, James, run, please!" she pleaded with him as streams of tears poured down her face. James, completely overwhelmed by the situation he found himself in, was frozen in place, completely taken with fear. "Run, James, please, run!" his mother begged, but still he couldn't move. He couldn't think. He couldn't do a thing except feel fear and terror he had never in his life felt before, a fear that kept him glued to that spot. His eyes affixed to his mother's, his tear-filled eyes being pierced by hers, piercing down to his very soul. His soul that now felt as though it was being ripped out his tiny body, cruelly being torn from his chest. Suddenly, two firm hands grasped his shoulders, James jumped as if the touch from an unknown source jolted him out of his trance. He looked up to see who had grabbed him. The angry, fearsome face of a town guard stared right back at him. "No!" shrieked his mother, using all her strength to break free from her captor. A flash of orange light blinded James, shortly followed by a blast of hot air that came from behind him. It felt as if the sun was beating down on him on a hot summer's day, searing him. He didn't see what had happened exactly, but the man that was standing behind him immediately let go. James took a few steps forward to escape the burning rush of wind that came from behind and quickly turned to face the man that had grabbed hold of him. The man was completely engulfed in flames. He was screaming in agony, waving his arms frantically in the air and running about aimlessly. James turned to look at his mother. The man holding her swung his club and struck her on the back of her head. As if time itself ceased to exist, James watched as she slowly fell to her knees before him. James felt someone else grab him now. He turned quickly to see his brother, who pulled him with all his strength away from the crowd, and together both boys began running towards the bridge. James was running as fast as he possibly could. He really had no choice in the matter, since Marcus was basically dragging him. After running for a few moments, he could hear the screams of the mob behind him begin to fade. He looked back upon the horrific scene he had just fled from. It appeared as though it was a distant memory, a distant dream that couldn't possibly be true. The man still engulfed in flames was being thrown to the floor by another man. Another man threw his coat over him in an effort to extinguish the blaze. The crowd was still circling the spot where his poor mother lay, scared and alone. The whole scene just seemed so surreal. "Get them!" One of the guards that was standing near the crowd was pointing towards James. The man was yelling at two guards on horseback that had just arrived on the scene to investigate the commotion. Without hesitation, the guards on horseback began galloping towards them. "They're coming," yelled James. "They're going to get us." "We're almost to the bridge," Marcus yelled back, running towards the darkness. James, looking ahead, could see where the buildings ended and the edge of town began. For the first time in his life, he found comfort in the shadows that lay before him. As the two young brothers approached the darkness where they knew the bridge lay hidden, a black figure materialized out of the shadows. They kept running towards it. As they did, the figure came into clear view. The form of another guardsman emerged from the shadows. The boys stopped so suddenly that their shoes slipped upon the loose gravel covering the cobblestone road. Managing to keep their footing, they stared at the guard in fear. He slowly began walking towards them with his hand on the hilt of his sword. The boys quickly searched for another escape route. The men on horseback were still racing towards them, the horses in full gallop. The sound of their hooves echoed loudly as they pounded against the stones below. The boys froze, looking in every direction for a way out of their dire situation. James, recalling the words that his friend Peter spoke, "My mum told me they burnt her at the stake for bewitching her husband." He imagined himself tied to a post, his brother and mother on either side, as a man in a dark hood set him ablaze. Suddenly a loud whistle broke the silence. The boys looked in the direction from where the sound emanated. A cloaked figure shrouded in darkness motioned them towards an alleyway. Without a second thought, the boys ran towards the figure. The figure turned and led them down the alleyway, the boys in hot pursuit. The three of them quickly made their way along the dark, narrow path. James, who had on occasion played down these roads, knew that they led to walkways that crossed the town. These walkways were nearly as narrow as the alleyways themselves. People who couldn't afford the high prices of homes on the main roads lived along them. These walkways were not well kept and often were littered with trash and refuse. The alleys that dissected these smaller paths, just like the one they were running down, wrapped around the whole town in a circular pattern. Halfway down the path, fading shouts from the guards could still be heard behind them. "They're getting away!" shouted one man, followed by another who yelled, "What are you waiting for, men? After them!" The two boys continued chasing the dark cloaked figure, and sure enough, after a few moments they emerged onto one of these smaller roads. The dark figure didn't even hesitate. It just streaked across the walkway and right into the preceding alleyway, with Marcus close behind him. James took a quick glance down the road as he ran across. He could see all the way to the town square. A bright orange glow filled the square. The light was only broken by shadows of humanoid figures that appeared to be surrounding it. It must have been a very large fire to be casting that amount of light, James thought to himself. The view of the square was obstructed, and he was back in the darkness of the next alley. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust, but he continued running blindly. At that moment, however, his foot caught a crate. The contents of the crate crashed all over the alley. James staggered desperately, trying to stay on his feet. Luckily, he managed it and continued behind his brother. The moment of unstable footing caused him to fall further behind his brother. He tried to quicken his pace to catch up. His eyes were now fully adjusted to the darkness, and he saw Marcus leap over something blocking the path. As he approached what appeared to be another large crate carelessly placed right in the middle of the alley. This time he was ready, and without missing a step, he leaped over it and began catching up to his brother. Marcus bumped into a bin ahead of him, sending it flying across the alley, forcing James to dodge its contents. After avoiding a few more of these random obstructions, James caught a glimpse of light emerging around the corner of a building ahead. They quickly arrived at the next crossroad, and without a moment's delay, he saw the dark figure take a sharp right and disappear around the corner. Marcus followed, quickly disappearing from view as well. James wrapped around the corner and chased after his brother, turning his head for a second to peer back at the square once more. He could now see the light source, and indeed it was a very large bonfire in the square. Even more black figures now blocked the light from view, casting silhouettes on the buildings surrounding the square. Suddenly, a bright flash of green light burst forth and illuminated the tall buildings surrounding him. Screams and commotion could be heard echoing through the streets from the direction of the square. James tried to remain focused on his companions in front of him, lest he trip again and find himself playing catch-up. The dark figure continued running at the same quick pace, leading them out of town and towards the unknown of the wilderness ahead. The moon was now out and in its entire glorious splendor. His eyes were now accustomed to the darkness, and it seemed as though a spotlight had illuminated the landscape before him. They continued running a few moments longer until the town faded behind them. The figure that had been leading them to safety came to an abrupt stop. James was grateful for this. He keeled over completely out of breath. His lungs instantly started sucking in the cold night air. It burned his throat and lungs as it gushed into him. After breathing heavily for a few moments, he looked up. His brother and the dark figure were also hunched over, apparently attempting to catch their breaths as well. He was relieved to see the dark figure acting this way. He wasn't entirely sure why this brought comfort to him. Maybe it was something about the act that made the figure seem more human, not just a dark and frightening entity he couldn't see. He took this opportunity to stagger towards the figure, trying to get a better look. The dark figure turned to face James, then slowly lifted its arms up. The Book of Sampson, The Order of the Light, written by D.F. Rivera, read by ChatGPT.